Hi, I'm Ted Bosley, Executive Director of the Gamble House Conservancy, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Everybody's got some niche that they're into, right? There's cat people, NASCAR people, golf people, escape room people, and even after 55 years, Star Trek people.
I'm giving her all she's got, Captain.
For instance. Today we welcome leaders in two special niches of modernism, Beth Lennon, a.k.a. Maud Betty of Retro Roadmap, and Howard and Gaby Morris of Grayscape in London. Later on, we got more great jazz from the wonderful Melissa Morgan. And now, complete with a uniform, the Spock ears, and his phaser set to stun, here's your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thank you, Tom. Hi, folks. I'm George, and I'm a Star Trek fan.
Hello, George.
But Tom is kidding. I'm not actually in Starfleet attire today. In fact, after decades of loving Star Trek, I have never been to a convention. I've seen all the movies, all the series, all the books, but I never dressed up or put on the ears or even owned a replica phaser. I do have, however, an unopened bottle of Klingon wine on my desk.
Ooh.
And Trek cosplay is on the bucket list. I hear the place to do it is in Ticonderoga, New York, a little town way up the Hudson, where a guy recreated the entire Enterprise bridge full scale. This profound nerd love of Star Trek was rekindled recently when I watched a documentary on Leonard Nimoy. He played Science Officer Spock, the character who even more than intergalactic womanizer James Tiberius Kirk was the core of the TV show and many movie sequels. President Obama issued an unusually personal announcement that he loved Spock when Nimoy died in 2015. McCoy's gone too. Scotty's gone, as is Nurse Chapel, the crew's very best enemy, Khan Noonien Singh, and even the green-skinned Orion girl every straight Trek boy longed for. Live long and prosper, Spock. Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin. Mr. Guild, let's go to Warp 3.
Strap her in. Our first guest today is Beth Lennon, also known as Maud Betty, who travels the U.S. visiting mom and pop businesses with authentic vintage charm. She combines her passions for architecture, art history, photography, modernism, and road trips to share her discoveries on the website Retro Roadmap, tirelessly working to save these places before they disappear to the McBlandness of America's roadsides. Beth inspires people to go back in time and visit these amazing places. Welcome, Beth.
Why, thank you. Nice to be here.
Joining us from London are two members of modernist royalty, if your vast kingdom is concrete. Howard and Gaby Morris run Grayscape, a website dedicated to brutalism, modernism, and constructivist design. By day, Howard is a lawyer for business restructuring and insolvency at Morrison & Foerster, and Gaby is a businesswoman who established her own company in 1989. Grayscape originally launched as an Instagram account in 2016 and is now a destination where everyone can learn, share, and interact with the very best in these strong, sturdy, and we think beautiful concrete buildings in the UK and around the world. Welcome, Howard and Gaby.
Hi.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thank you all for joining us. Beth, let's start with you. So how did this Retro Roadmap thing start? I mean, was this just always a hobby of yours and you turned it into more of a passion, or what happened?
Well, it actually pretty much started, and I'm not going to disclose my age, but when I got my driver's license back a couple of years ago, and I realized how much fun it was to go out with my camera and discover places that looked unfamiliar to me from the New England landscape, the colonial, bicentennial type thing that I grew up with. So I started as primarily an art historian and photographer, And this is kind of a passion that has just woven through my personal life, through the years. It wasn't until I realized that there were so many of these places that I would love and photograph and really, feel like I stepped back in time when I went in them, that I realized that they were closing at a bit of an alarming rate, that I realized I needed to embrace the internet and get the word out, as it were, to like minds who would love these places. So I thought if I let people know about them, then it will be so much easier for them to find these mom and pop places that, as I said, feel like you're stepped back in time.
What was the first place you posted about that was really a hit with your viewers?
Ooh, well, actually one of the ones that has been a perennial favorite and I think would be appealing to both, U.S. modernist listeners as well as what I call retro road mappers is the Caribbean Motel in Wildwood, New Jersey. And every time I post about that, because it is so beautiful and so iconic, I get a huge response from people.
Wildwood, New Jersey. What is that even near?
That's on the coast, isn't it?
Yeah, so Wildwood, New Jersey is on the Jersey Shore. I'm from New England, so we call it the beach, but in Jersey they call it the shore. And actually, Wildwood was at some point, and I still believe is, the town with the highest percentage of mid-century modern motels in the world. It really developed when the Garden State Parkway went down to the New Jersey coast after World War II. Families that had station wagons with little baby boomer little kids in it wanted someplace to go drive. And so in the 50s and early 60s, tons of wonderfully architecturally interesting motels popped up to serve these families. And while many of them have been knocked down, sadly, there's still a very high concentration there.
We have to put that on the list, Tom.
Yeah.
Wildwood, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Now, across the pond, Howard and Gaby, tell us about the very special place that you live.
We live in the Barbican, which is in the City of London. By that, don't mean London, but the square mile that reaches
the original London, yes.
The original Roman city. And the Barbican, a Barbican is part of a city wall, and the Barbican estate was built on a 40-acre site, bombed flat during the Second World War. So our home is thanks to the Luftwaffe. And we moved in. We must write to them. We moved in about 26 years ago because I wanted to live somewhere where I could walk to work. It was close to the children's prep school, which was just 150 metres away. And we've grown to love the place. Now, what's extraordinary about the Barbican is that it was planned during the Second World War. The Corporation of London was very concerned about the declining population of the City of London, not just because they wanted to have people back and they wanted it to be a nice neighbourhood, but probably largely because they wanted to ensure that it continued to have a Member of Parliament assigned to the constituency. Now, the Corporation of London itself is the oldest local authority in the world, and it's steeped in tradition. In fact, the monarch, the Queen, can't even enter the City of London without first asking permission. So its liberties and rights go back well over 1,000 years. And here it was, embracing, in a competition for a design story, a undoubtedly modernist, indeed brutalist design because of the exposed concrete, which was built. It contains over 2,000 homes, an art centre with concert halls. It was the home of the Royal Shakespeare Company for many, many years, and they still come back. Cinemas, art galleries, a library. And then after building it beginning the building about 65 years ago, and the first residents moving in 50 years ago, it then spent the next 5 decades being embarrassed about having built something so modern.
So much concrete.
And we think it's very, very beautiful. But the strange thing about the Barbican, before the last 5-6 years, people would have no hesitation in pitying us for living there. Oh, how can you? As if you would ever say that about anybody's home circumstances, but they'd say, "Well, why are you living there?" It's terrible.
But it's changed now enormously.
It's now very chic, very fashionable. People flock from all around the world to visit the Barbican, and we're delighted about it because we think, as communal living, as creating a modern neighbourhood, it has been fantastically successful.
The Barbican was held up, as you said, for years as an example of bad architecture. I think Prince Charles really was not too pleased with it, was he?
Well, he had, Prince Charles, we should embrace the fact about people having opinions about buildings because we all do.
But there should be equality as to the voice they have. And Prince Charles had a disproportionately loud voice because of his status, but his passion is for sort of Palladian revival.
But he was also, I think it's quite interesting, there was a chap called Theo Crosby, and Prince Charles was very influenced by Theo Crosby, and he started off quite early on with a groundbreaking exhibition called This Is Our Tomorrow. So Theo was one to listen to, and I think a lot of his opinions are Theo's opinions.
When did the opinion turn in the public view about the Barbican? When did it start to be loved as opposed to hated or tolerated?
I think it's very age-related. You simply need to walk around the place and see it. It's quite clearly 35 and under are all out with their cameras taking sort of shots of sort of the concrete and sort of pillars and pilotti and all sorts to see that they are the driving force. So I think it's a certain age group coming of age, let's say, that has actually driven the change. And what Howard was talking about, this peculiar embarrassment about what had been created turned into an embrace of something quite extraordinary, influenced by Le Corbusier as well. People began to see the connections, what it was about. I just would also want to say that there was and remains a very sort of anti-view about estates that are made of concrete, and a lot of them are social housing.
What you'd call projects.
What you'd call projects,
yes.
Yeah. So in the understanding and misunderstanding of those, at one point Barbican got kind of lumped into that.
There was an assumption. After the war, there was a desperate need for housing, and suddenly the techniques of poured concrete and elevator technology had all caught up, and they could build these big blocks and rehouse people. And there was one particular couple who built an estate called Robin Hood Estate who really coined the word brutalism, Alison and
the Smithsons.
The Smithsons, yes. And the problem with a lot of the public housing designs, having built some very imaginative housing blocks, then the local authorities didn't have the money to maintain them. And people who had lived in dreadful conditions but had had their own front doors onto the street really struggled to adapt to high-rise living. So a lot of mistakes were made. Now we see a number of those developments becoming much loved architectural icons.
Beth, I know that for motels, for instance, there's a lot of neon and metal. Do you find any structures along the way out of concrete in Retro Roadmap?
Well, it's a little bit more under what I call my umbrella of mid-mod map, but at the moment I am gazing lovingly at a picture of the TWA Hotel at the JFK Airport.
Oh, yes, one of our favorites.
Yes, and while that isn't necessarily a roadside delight, I definitely have myself driven up there and parked and stayed just for the weekend to kind of embrace that. I think you tend to find the more brutalist type architecture, just as far as retro road mapping go, would be seen more in the chain motels, the early Holiday Inns, things like that. And especially with the chains, they are often reinventing themselves and trying to keep up appearances. So you don't find a lot of that kind of on the retro road. But sometimes when you put on your modernist or your mid-mod map glasses, you can find the TWA Hotel or the Hotel Valley Ho out in Phoenix. That type of thing is a little bit more modern.
Now, I love the photos of your vintage 1964 camper with the turquoise stripe. Is that roadworthy? Do you take that on the road? Oh,
I do, actually, yeah. So we don't bring it on the road as much as we thought we would, frankly. It was kind of funny. My husband and I, he's a musician, and we spent a lot of time on the road, and yet we didn't realize how much that we always wanted a vintage camper, but we don't really camp, which was kind of funny. But we fell in love with that kind of teardrop style and that lovely aqua stripe. We have taken it on road trips, and also when I go traveling across the states to promote my Retro Roadmap road book, we often have that as what I call the largest conversation piece possible, because people will come over and say, well, what's this camper? And I said it was the thing to get you close enough so that I could tell you about my book.
Good plan.
Loss leader.
Yes, exactly.
Good plan. Howard and Gaby, I know a lot of people who don't like brutalism imagine that it's just horrible to live inside a place like the Barbican. So describe for our listeners what the vibe is. Why is it so pleasant to live there?
So the aim always was to make it like an urban village, and it is. And it does reference in its design many features of what people would think of as castles. And around us, there are parts of the Roman wall and the medieval walls of the City of London. So it's a continuous design story with that. And it really does. The time was taken, the designers, the architects of the estate were really fastidious in making sure that they continued the design from gardens. There are large gardens here. Looking out of our window, which is an 18-foot window in our sitting room, it's a split level.
18-foot window?
Yeah.
A lot of light pouring in.
Wow, that's a big window.
We're looking out on a 2.5 acre residence garden with large lawns, trees and shrubberies. So there's a lot of air. We're in the centre of London here. We are 4 or 5 minutes walk from St Paul's Cathedral, but it's quiet. And then there's a lake and a waterfall and another garden. There are swings and slides for small children. There's tennis courts. So it does have a very, very bucolic feel, notwithstanding that there are these massive blocks standing on great solid concrete pilotis.
Howard, how many people live at the Barbican?
It's about 4,500, 5,000 people.
Wow.
I think the thing is, one of the great jokes of the Barbican is that people say, I always get lost there. And we say, well, think of it as a district, not just purely the name of a destination, which you may or may not find. And if you begin to think of it almost then you take district a step further and you go to village, you get quite near to what it is really like to live here, which I think really goes to the heart of your original question. So you have this hard exterior, there's a lot of concrete, but you also have this inner feeling of being protected, but not in a kind of a scary way, like I need to be protected from the outside world, but it's protective feeling. And that works. And of course, like concrete mavens will get really boring about how beautiful the concrete looks at certain times of the day based on the weather. So there's all this other stuff going on.
And all these tens of thousands of square feet of concrete are bush hammered. So after the concrete was poured and formed, then the workers on the site with hammers and chisels chiseled a surface on it. Now that was all done by hand, and pretty hard labour it was, but it creates this wonderful tactile texture throughout the estate.
I think there's also this issue, if you think about Paul Rudolph's architecture. I mean, obviously we love it. It's a divider, isn't it? And I think one half of the argument will spend a lot of time explaining to the other half why they like, and then they'll be explaining about why they don't like.
Maud Betty, it's a lot of fun exploring your site, which goes state by state. What are some of the places that you've visited that are out of the way that people might want to take time to visit as well?
Oh, gosh. Well, it depends on where you're coming from. But on the road, I know I've mentioned a couple of motels, but I actually found the most charming little mom-and-pop motel that is a bit of a mid-century find in a little town called Romney, West Virginia. It is called the Cool Wink Motel, and it's been around since the 30s. They added on in the 50s and decorated that way, and the family has been so fastidious with their decor that really all they've done is cleaned it and kept it up. So that's a bit of a time capsule.
And it's called the what wink?
The Cool Wink.
It's called the Cool Wink with a K. Oh. Yep. And it's got a mascot of a gentleman who's winking at you, and he's wearing a top hat, which in the middle of the mountains of West Virginia isn't something you would often see. So that's a find. Another one, which is so incongruous that I love it, it's called the O'Hare Motor Lodge, and it's in Great Falls. Montana. And while the Motor Lodge itself is fine, it's really known for the fact that it's got a tiki bar with a pool where women dressed up as mermaids will swim, and you can see them. It's a glass pool that you can see from when you're sitting at the tiki bar having a Mai Tai. And there's a lovely woman named Piano Pat. She's about 80-plus years old at this point, and she plays cocktail piano in this. So it's a bit of this wonderful vintage kitsch find in the middle of Montana.
Yeah, mermaids were really big in the 50s. I think they're still going in Florida at Weeki Wachee.
Yes, it's very similar to Weeki Wachee. Mm-hmm. Yep,
that is so fun.
Except you can't have a cocktail unless you sneak one in at the Weeki Wachee. But definitely you can have a giant fish bowl.
In Florida, yeah.
I thought they had drive-through bars in Florida.
Well, they do, but not at Weeki Wachee.
Okay.
It's more of a family place.
Exactly.
Howard and Gaby, how did Grayscape get started?
Grayscape started originally, as you said, with our Instagram, which is called Barbican City of London, rather clumsily, because we never expected to become popular. There's an underscore between each word, Barbican City of London, there as a plug. So we started that because one of the high walks here, one of the features of Barbican is that pedestrian traffic is lifted above the level of the roads, and one of the high walks goes past our kitchen window, and people would peer in when they were on architectural tours. And so Gaby said, let's put some pictures up. And we did, of the Barbican, because we loved it. And very quickly we started acquiring followers, and we knew almost nothing about Instagram then. Now, a few years later, we're at over 37,000 followers. It grows all the time. And most of the photographs for the Instagram are crowdsourced, because all around the world, there are people who love their modernist designs. They may live somewhere which is a pretty tough place to live, but there'll be a modernist building or a constructivist design there that they love and they're proud of, and they want to feature it in photographs. And just in the last few days, we've featured a campaign to save a Soviet-era cinema in a town in Lithuania, which is about to be demolished, and spomenics in Yugoslavia, which are these great concrete memorials to the Second World War and the resistance and the murders of Yugoslavs of all races in the Nazi occupation. But they chose to commemorate these tragic events with the most soaring, beautiful modernist designs.
I just wanted to add something. Really sort of struck me listening to Betty's description of these amazing places, which, by the way, we're writing them all down. It's, as much as it is about the architecture and the design, there is this human factor. This the people. It's the people who are operating the places that are being visited, or who care about something that's not being looked after properly. I think that's a really important component. And that's what drew us to take the Instagram onto a website.
And because we're not architects or engineers, we can't help but come at the buildings from the stories of the individuals. And very often, as Gaby says, it's people who are not architects, engineers, or involved in design at all. They have very quotidian lives, but they love a building, they use a building, they want that building to remain. Sometimes there aren't enough of them that can stand in the way of redevelopment, but they will try to do so. That's really that human angle we think is absolutely fascinating. I think that's a lot about what enchants people about the buildings that Betty's finding, that they have survived, notwithstanding that they may be more difficult to run economically now, notwithstanding that they represent a taste and fashion that has gone in and out of popularity. That's what's remarkable. It's a human story.
Now, Betty, we're big fans of Palm Springs. I imagine you've got some favorite spots there.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have such a crush on Palm Springs. It's like embarrassing how much I could just walk around and just ogle those wonderful houses that everybody's so lucky to live in. Yeah, I do have a few favorites. I don't know why the hotel. I guess it's because I'm cooped up in my own house for the past year that I cannot wait to go stay someplace else. But I am so looking forward. I actually made a reservation at the Orbit Inn that my husband and I will be spending a week there next year when it's chilly and wintry and awful in Pennsylvania. We're going to be poolside there. And then actually they have some lovely architectural tours you can take where they take you around and really get you, kind of behind the scenes in some of the beautiful houses there. I am a tiki bar fan, so there's a number of tiki bars in town. To me, there's a magnet under Palm Springs that just attracts people who love that kind of mid-century design, whether it be architecture, lifestyle, photography, anything. So that is one of my happy places, yeah.
Well, if there's a magnet under Palm Springs, I imagine it's encased in a giant concrete bunker built by the military.
Perhaps, but it's going to be surrounded by breeze block, you see, so it would be something attractive as well.
Now, Howard and Gaby, who are the members of this group called the Concrete Community?
Everybody who loves concrete.
Yeah. Anybody can join.
You may not even realize you're a member.
Yeah.
Concrete is a much maligned material when, in fact, handled sensitively and formed correctly isn't just a cheap way of building big. It actually can provide an alternative, a much better alternative to many other materials.
Be very artistic, yes.
Absolutely, be very, very artistic in the right hands. Much of the problem with developments, and I guess we would say that about the most recent developments, is that they are to a price. And the idea of forming large buildings on steel frames and hanging glass, we can turn our nose up at, but we also know that the demands for buildings now include a much, much greater attention to their carbon footprints and the use of power. So some brilliant designers are working in forms now that don't fit with the precepts of modernist design. But we heard something very encouraging. We listened to a fabulous webinar the other night, and it was about brutalism in Berlin. Berlin has a real hodgepodge, as we know, of all sorts of different design stories and great competition between the West and the East. But there are apparently now working German people who the host of the webinar described as neo-brutalists. So they're taking some of the modernist elements of brutalist design and repurposing them, and you begin to see buildings that aren't symmetrical and exactly the same view from every elevation. Which is very encouraging. Perhaps we're going to see a renaissance.
Now, we talk all the time about U.S. modernist architects. Who were some of the big names in modernism in the U.K.?
Well, we mentioned Erno Goldfinger.
Okay.
So he would be so I think one needs to think also sort of the add-on of emigre architects. Some of them who came and stayed, and Erno Goldfinger, whose name was later used by Ian Fleming.
I've seen the movie about him. Yes.
There's a funny backstory on that, which do Google and read. So Goldfinger remained in England, and there are a number who passed through.
Well, Bertold Lebetkin. Bertold Lebetkin was another émigré who came after the Russian Revolution and remained all his life a devoted communist. So he wouldn't say it to look at him because he loved champagne and the good life. But he built some absolutely fabulous buildings. Just up the road from the Barbican is an area called Finsbury. It used to be known as the Socialist Republic of Finsbury between the wars because it elected died in the war hard leftists, but they introduced a program of social housing. And so Bertold Lebetkin built before and after the Second World War. Erich Mendelsohn passed through here, and before he got to the United States and Israel, he also built in this country, he built a beautiful seaside
pavilion.
Pavilion.
Beth, how do you get your intelligence? How do people find things and send you information? And I also want to know, is there going to be a book in the works?
Well, actually, I have 4 books now. I started with 5. One is out of print, but I've done some regional guides I'd like to get down there and really highlight the mom and pops, which means I have to spend a lot of time on the road, kind of unearthing these places that have become invisible to people over the decades. But I've got some books that are primarily in the Northeast, so Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And then, the neat thing is that since I have kind of become known as almost a clearinghouse for this type of retro travel type places, people post things to the Retro Roadmap Facebook page. I have an email address and a forum on retroroadmap.com, hashtagged on Instagram, and I am such a collector of these types of places because I love to visit them myself. I pop them onto a Google map that I have at the ready anytime I'm able to leave the house and go traveling. So anytime anybody, finds something they think I like, they bring it to my attention, and it's a bit of a hive mind that we all love them. So it's like sharing some fun discoveries with somebody you know is going to appreciate them.
It really is a wonderful site.
Oh, thank you.
Howard and Gaby, I want to ask you about one building in particular, the Isokon building. Tell me about its history and why it's important.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit, but then I'm going to hand to Howard, who actually really did a deep dive about it. So it's known partially as the Isokon building because that's the name of the company that designed furniture, but it's also known as Lawn Road Flats. And it's one of the earliest examples of a fascinating sort of situation where you've both got a beautifully designed block of flats and a mode for living, a way for the residents to live, with the add-on of some very, very interesting people actually living there.
It's a fascinating story. The genius behind Lawn Road Flats is Molly and Jack Pritchard. And Jack Pritchard started a business using that incredible and very new material, which he had to import from Latvia, I believe it was, plywood. Oh. And the Isokon company made furniture, and still does, out of plywood, and quite a genius. But Molly and Jack were a bit like magpies. They collected people and they collected ideas. And while Jack and Molly weren't designers, they attracted around them some very, very far-sighted people. And with a Canadian designer engineer called Wells Coates, the Isokon was designed, and as Gaby said, it was a mode for living. The flats are very small because you were expected to go and eat in a central refectory. They were made for people leading a modern life with all the various modern cons, which to our eyes now might look terribly outdated. But when they were built in the 1930s and early 1930s, were at the very leading edge of modernism. The building itself is white with a very broad frontage and walkways. It has that really strong modernist feel.
Who are some of the most famous residents?
Well, there you have that.
There's one that I love, maybe not so well known, but incredibly important, called Edith Tudor Hart.
Yes.
So Edith Tudor Hart actually trained at the Bauhaus with Walter Gropius. She trained in photography, had to leave Austria. She was Jewish, and her brother was a very famous photographer known as Wolfie, but she married Tudor Hart. So she suddenly became the most English. It's the most English name you can come up with, really, isn't it? Edith Tudor Hart. But actually, she truly believed in the communist cause. I mean, deeply believed in it. And how did she, well, Howard, over to you.
It was Andre Deutsch, Dr. Arnold Deutsch, rather, who was an NKVD, which is the forerunner to the KGB agent, who lived in flat number 7 at the Isokon. He recruited the infamous Cambridge Five, so Burgess, MacLean, all these tremendous traitors who were recruited into the British Secret Intelligence Service because they were the right sort of chaps and were convinced communists and betrayed this country and its allies. And then Burgess, MacLean...
She was very involved. She was... She was if she was in a film, she'd be the person with the dead letterboxes.
And of course, perhaps the one who survived was Anthony Blunt, who bargained a confession to the intelligence service for being left alone in his job as the keeper of the Queen's pictures. He looked after all the Queen's paintings, and the government were quite content not to put him on trial because by then it had been so embarrassed by there being 4 Cambridge spies. A 5th one would just be too much.
I think also, did Agatha Christie?
Agatha Christie stayed there. And we know that you're quite a fan of the Bauhaus. Now, Walter Gropius, when he was in London for a year or so, didn't live in the Bauhaus, but he was part of the circle. And there was an intellectual circle at the Bauhaus, which included the director of the London Zoo. And some of these people we would now regard as a little bit dodgy because while their ideas were very, very forward-thinking in terms of a social movement, they also embraced eugenics, which is obviously something that we find horrifying.
So you had this crowd hanging out together, and it's, if you had a sort of a board, you'd have sort of strings sort of pulling them all together.
Right.
So there's somebody thinking about sort of eugenics, there's somebody thinking about animal behaviour, there's somebody thinking about the design of how people move about a building or how they sit on a chair. It was all very, very...
The Breuer chair you didn't mention.
Oh, yeah, the Breuer chair. So Breuer was involved, and I think Breuer actually worked for the Isokon company and designed a particular chair.
Yes, he did.
It's a wonderful place.
Interesting, Bertold Lubetkin, who I mentioned before, lived just up the road, but we can't find any connection. In fact, one of the curators at the museum that's at the Isokon, well worth a visit. It just take you 3/4 of an hour to walk around it. It's quite small, but it has some beautiful, beautiful exhibits. He's the leading biographer of Bertold Lubetkin, and Lubetkin lived less than a mile away and never mixed with the crowd at the Isokon. The nearest equivalent I can think of in terms of its vibe, its ethos, is the Narkomfin building in Moscow, where it was meant to be a community who ate together and shared facilities. It never worked out. The flats were very, very small. People moved out, became decayed. It ended up as a doss house for drug addicts before it was saved by a housing association.
I have a feeling, and this will need to be checked out, I have a feeling that Molly Pritchard came to America and lived with the Gropiuses for at least a year.
She did, with her children. They were evacuated during the war, and they lived at...
is it Lincoln?
When Gropius was at Harvard.
Yeah.
Well, this is all very fascinating, but we are just about out of time for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's dinner time over in the UK. Howard and Gaby, where can people find you online?
So online, it's www.greyscape, GREYSCAPE.com, and Instagram, Barbican City of London, with underscores between each word. And we would be delighted if any of the listeners sent us photographs of their favourite buildings, and we would be very, very happy to feature them and give them full attribution. It'd be wonderful for us.
And Betty's finds.
And
Definitely.
Betty's finds. We should be visiting.
And Betty, how can people reach you?
Well, it's pretty easy. RetroRoadmap.com is the website. There's also a Retro Roadmap Instagram page, Facebook page, and a YouTube channel. So Retro Roadmap, you Google that, and I'm all over the place.
I just want to thank Howard and Gaby and Maud Betty because in addition to being great guests on the show today, they've been wonderfully supportive of U.S. modernists over the last couple of years, and we really appreciate that. Born in New York City and raised in Teaneck, New Jersey, Melissa Morgan studied jazz vocal performance at SUNY Purchase and became a hit in the New York jazz club scene. She made her recording debut in 2009 with the release of Until I Met You, and her second album, Days Like This, was released in 2016. Welcome, Melissa.
Hello. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. You know, you and I have been talking, and you sound really engaging, but I read an old interview where you said twice that you were super shy. Is that still true?
Oh, God, yes. You know, I feel like I have two beings, laying inside of me. But, I mean, give me a microphone, George, and I'm just ready to go, But beforehand is another story. I mean, I might as well be a rabid dog. I'm just, in the corner shaking and worried, and I invent these stories that no one's going to be there or everybody's going to be out there with tomatoes. I mean, my mind is not a neighborhood you want to be dropped off in.
Well, that means if we go to dinner, I need to bring a microphone?
Well, that or a martini.
Okay. We've got plenty of those.
Yeah, you have to work on the martini glass that doubles as a microphone.
Well, if it's finished, I can turn it into a microphone,
Right.
So
anything with a long stem.
You come from a long line of musicians. Your grandmother almost went to Juilliard, is that right?
She did. She had a full scholarship to Juilliard, and the market crashed. And this was back,
the
100
Great
years
Depression.
ago.
Yeah.
And it was revoked, sadly. But she was a great classical singer in Philadelphia on the radio. And believe it or not, my dad has a beautiful voice. And you would never know it except if you were at the house for breakfast. He'll sing while he's making breakfast, and that's a definite happy memory for me, of smelling coffee and bacon and hearing my father's voice. But he's up there with like Johnny Hartman.
Wow.
What would he sing?
Yeah. He would sing a lot of Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, and I've been secretly trying to think about how to get him recorded. I'd love to record with him one day if he would ever grow the nerve.
I think a duets album could work.
Well, that's a little too far, George. Maybe one song he would agree to, but it's on my bucket list.
Oh, that's really cool. That's super cool. Now, how does one break into the New York jazz scene, of which you've made all the rounds? How do you get started in that?
With bloody knuckles and, begging, and it's hard. Lots of humility, staying up late, showing up is really what it comes down to. Show up. I made the rounds from a young age, going to jam sessions, going to gigs. Definitely use every penny you have to go to every gig out there. And if anyone's in town, you've got to show up. And that's how you get started. And you ask questions. You sit in at jam sessions. And there's a quote from maybe it was Art Blakey, and he said, "Don't try and sound anybody on a gig. Just show up and be there, be on the scene." And it's true, because everyone has had really interesting, unique stories on how they got here or there. And some people were a bit more persistent than others, but across the board, just showing up means a lot.
It's like the comedy scene where comedians know they just have to be at the clubs at night and try to get on the schedule, try to hang out with everybody afterwards.
Or if somebody calls in sick and, we need somebody for this slot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how it happens many of the time. I remember I got this wedding gig at the last minute because someone was sick, but it was with, Joe Farnsworth and Harold Mayburn and Eric Alexander and Jim Rotundi. It was just an all-star lineup, and it was a wedding gig, but I was only 19, I think, so I was
nice,
just over the moon.
Well, this first song was written by Harold Arlen and Truman Capote. Yes, the author of In Cold Blood, that Truman Capote.
Wow.
For the 1954 musical House of Flowers, which featured the great Diane Carroll. Plus, you can hear versions by crooner Mel Torme, Tony Bennett, and even Barbra Streisand. Here's Melissa with A Sleepin' Bee, and I gotta say, I like yours the best.
When a bee lies sleeping in the palm of your hand, you'll be bewitched and deep in love's long looked after land, where you'll see a sun-up sky with a morning dew. And when the days go laughing by, as love comes calling on you, sleep on, bee, don't waken. Can't believe what just passed. He's mine for the taking. I'm happy at last. Maybe I dream, but he seems sweet, golden as a crown. Well, a sleeping bee done told me I walk with my feet off the ground. When my one true love I have found. A bee lies sleeping in the palm of your hand. You'll be bewitched and deep in love's long looked after land, where you'll see a sun-up sky with a morning new. And when the days go laughing by, as love comes calling on you, sleep on me, don't waken, can't believe what just passed. He's mine for the taking, I'm so happy at last. Maybe I dream, but he seems sweet, golden as a crown. Well, a sleeping bee done told me I walk with my feet off the ground, where my one true love I have found.
Wow, when did you record that?
2007, and it made me really have a moment and think about Gerald Clayton in 2007 and Gerald Clayton now. I mean, he was incredible then, and to think of what he's accomplished is just remarkable. And Joe Sanders on bass, he's living in Paris now. And I think about when I first met him, and they're just such beautiful souls. And to know these guys is really a privilege.
I wanted to ask you, Melissa, where's the best jazz scene outside of New York?
You know, I love Oakland.
Really? Oakland?
Oakland has, yeah. The Bay Area is one of the most knowledgeable jazz communities I've come across outside of New York. It's impressive. And I met Dr. Herb Wong, who was a DJ on K-Jazz, and he was a jazz historian. He was president of NJEA. He was just a wealth of knowledge. He was this little Chinese guy, and he met Charlie Parker and Billie Holiday and Duke Ellington as a teenager. And then he brought these jazz musicians into schools when he was in the school system in Palo Alto. But they really know their stuff out there. And the radio station is an example of their knowledge and support and love for the music. San Diego, Charlotte.
Charlotte, really?
Yeah.
That's close to us.
Yeah. Charlotte has a great jazz appreciation.
Now, one of the big names is Nancy Wilson, who died in 2018, one of your role models. Did you ever get to meet her or hear her sing?
Oh, yeah. She is my number one idol for sure. And I've met her and seen her on several occasions, and I'll never forget the first time I tried to introduce myself I actually ran away, George.
That's the shyness, right?
So sad. I saw her at the Blue Note twice, 2 nights in a row on this week she was there, and, used all my money to go see her. One night I went with my best friend. The other night I went by myself, and I remember calling my parents after the gig, and it was late. I stayed for both sets. And I was so moved, I called my father, and he picks up, and he's like, hello, are you okay? And I said, yeah, Dad, I'm fine. I just saw Nancy, and I just wanted to call you and tell you thank you for teaching me how to be a lady.
Ooh, my.
Wow.
How old were you?
I was 18 or 19.
Okay.
And Nancy Wilson is the epitome of elegance and grace and power, sensitivity. She just has everything, in my mind, a woman should be. And she brings you in without giving too much, and she brings you in a way that is elegant and tasteful and welcoming. And it's like she has a secret. And I remember after the gig, I stood in line, with everyone else waiting to get an autograph or just say hello. And she's in that little dressing room in the Blue Note on the second floor. And I'm next in line. And then all of a sudden, I can't do it. And I leave. And I turn around and I'm walking and I'm like, God, you idiot. I was just too nervous. And, I thought I can meet the President of the United States and be totally calm. And with Nancy Wilson, I couldn't do it. And then I'm watching her son bring her to her car outside when I leave the club. And I'm like, oh, gosh. And then I finally met her through her first husband at his birthday party in Los Angeles. And he introduced me and said, Nancy, she's a huge fan of yours. She sounds like you, which was such a compliment.
Wow.
And I walked her to her car, and I gave her my CD, and I said, you are absolutely my idol, and it's a privilege to meet you. And she listened to the CD, and then her son called me and shared with me that Nancy really loved the record and was so touched to hear her and me, which was, I'll never forget it. It was really wonderful.
When was that?
It was 2012.
2012, okay.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a story.
That's a great story.
Yeah. And then she actually made a call to a record label, which I will not mention, when I was looking for a new deal. And she said, I know so-and-so at so-and-so Records, and I'm going to call them. And she did. And she spoke to this man. I'm not going to say gentleman.
That bastard.
And the guy said to her, she sounds like Nancy Wilson. And she said, she sounds like Melissa Morgan. And he said, the problem is she sounds like Nancy Wilson. And she said, I don't see a problem with that, but she sounds like Melissa Morgan. And nothing transpired from it. But I was so touched that she made the call. I was annoyed by this guy, but, she made the call, which most people wouldn't do.
A gracious thing to do.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
This next song was written by Louis Jordan and Billy Austin. Not Louis Jourdain, who was the French actor, I found out in doing the research.
Okay.
And this song reached number 1 in 1943 and again in 1944 with Bing Crosby and the Andrews Sisters. More recently, it was performed by Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, and it was in the episode of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which is indeed marvelous. Here's Melissa with Is You Is or Is You Ain't My Baby.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3. I got a guy that's always late anytime we have a date, but I love him. Yes, I love him. And I'm gonna walk up to his gate and see if we can't get this thing straight, 'cause I want him and I intend to have him So I'll say, is you is or is you ain't my baby. The way you're acting lately makes me down. You is still my baby, baby. But it seems the flame in your heart's done gone out. You see, a fellow, he's a creature that has always been strange. Just when you think you're sure of one, he's gone and made a change. So I'll say, is you is or is you ain't my baby. Maybe baby's gone and found someone new, or is my baby still my baby true? Yes, I love him. And I'm gonna walk up to his gate and see if we can't get this thing straight. 'Cause I want him, and I intend to have him. So I'll say, is you is or is you ain't my baby. The way you're acting lately makes me down. You is still my baby, baby. But it seems the flame in your heart done gone out. You see, a fellow, he's a creature that has always been strange. Just when you think you're sure of one, he's gone and made a change. So, is you is or is you ain't my baby. Maybe baby, maybe baby, maybe baby, maybe baby, maybe baby's gone and found someone new. Oh, is my baby still my baby true?
You know, it's hard to get Tom to dance in his seat, but he is just rocking and rolling in there, Melissa.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's so sweet.
Let's cut to the chase, you know? Snooze, you lose.
Man. Well, I haven't listened to myself in
performance.
so long, and I forgot how uncomfortable it makes me. I feel like an antsy toddler that hasn't been fed.
Well, we'll have to get you some
it's nothing
snacks.
I'll
We
ever
will
get used to.
UPS them out immediately.
Right, you need a sippy cup?
Yeah.
Something.
Melissa, where can people reach you? What's your website?
We're working on a new website, melissamorganmusic.com, and that should be out shortly. And then on Instagram, which is probably where I participate the most, is Melissa Morgan Jazz. And again, I wish I were more comfortable to participate on social media, and I am working on that comfort level. I'm not one of those people who's on all the time, and I should. It's a New Year's resolution, George.
Okay. Well, I know one day, maybe not now, maybe not next week, but in the future, a young woman will be coming to you, her arms outstretched, a CD in it, and you will be asked to listen. And that will be a magical moment.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Thank you for joining us, Melissa.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin. Mr. Gild, set course 87 Mark V for the Omicron Delta system. I think it's time for a little shore leave.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 8,000 significant modernist houses, and access 3.1 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino tries to research our wonderful guest, except her adorable husband Adam took the computer out of town for 3 days without telling her. A serious loss of husband points. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Gild. George and I'll be back soon with another concrete and steel hidden treasure roadside Americana where no architecture podcast has gone before edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
I'm going to Google that place in Ticonderoga.